Ever pondered what links two seemingly divergent ideologies, feminism and religionism? Let's unravel this together. Feminism often paints men as the sole culprits of all injustice, creating a stark segregation between genders. They frame this disparity through the lens of power, reducing it to a simple equation of capital center. Religionism, on the other hand, traditionally portrays women as inferior beings, incapable of responsibility. This view, shared by many fervent believers, absolves women of accountability for their actions. Interestingly, both ideologies, despite their stark differences, seem to converge on a similar perspective concerning women's roles and responsibilities. Feminism's victimhood narrative and religionism's portrayal of women's inferiority may appear dissimilar on the surface. However, these ideologies share a common thread, a perspective that reduces womanhood to a state of passive existence. Despite their differences, a common thread weaves through these ideologies, their perspective on women's roles and responsibilities. Feminism, especially in its more radical forms, often paints women as victims. It's a perspective that allegedly arises from a place of wanting to protect and advocate for women. Well, if a group of weak have an enemy, then they should be protected, right? However, it can also be a double-edged sword, one that reduces women to a state of perpetual victimhood, stripping them of autonomy and responsibility. Let's take a closer look. Feminism often champions a narrative where men are the culprits and women are the victims. This perspective becomes problematic when it's applied universally, without considering the nuances of individual situations. Consider the case of a failed consensual relationship. Two adults willingly entered into a relationship, shared moments of joy and sorrow, and then, for whatever reason, the relationship ended on a sour note. If we follow the feminist narrative, the blame falls squarely on the man. The woman, in this scenario, is reduced to a mere victim, with no autonomy or authority, a being who had no say in the course of the relationship. This is where it gets dicey. By assigning blame solely to the man, we strip the woman of her agency, her ability to make decisions, her capacity to navigate the complexities of a relationship. The assumption that she is incapable of being responsible for her actions is not only unfair, but it's also inherently insulting. This perspective, in essence, places women in a lower state than men, as beings without responsibility. It's a narrative that doesn't align with the principles of equality and respect that feminism claims to uphold. Moreover, it's a narrative that's eerily similar to the one propagated by many religious extremists, who view women as inferior beings incapable of accountability. This shared perspective, while seemingly different on the surface, is rooted in the same underlying misconception about women's capacity for autonomy and responsibility. After all, equality is not about painting women as perpetual victims, but about recognizing their strength, their resilience, and their capacity to shape their own destinies. In essence, this perspective places women in a lower state than men as beings without responsibility. Religionism, traditionally, often assigns women a lesser standing in comparison to men. Venturing into the depths of religionism, we discover profound correlations with the extreme feminist perspective of women. Several established religious doctrines, including Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, depict women as entities of lesser value in comparison to men. Reflect upon the narratives that the domain of religion weaves. In many interpretations, women are considered secondary to men, often portrayed as being created from man and for man, or even as a source of man's downfall. This casts women in a subordinate position, a role that is more about being of service to others than being the master of their own fate. This pattern continues unswervingly when we consider accountability. In several religious traditions, women are commonly exempted from specific duties, rituals, and roles. For instance, within Christianity, women are traditionally precluded from priesthood, a role bearing supreme religious responsibility and leadership. In Judaism, women are exempt from certain mitzvot or commandments. Notably, they are often exempted from obligations tied to specific times, such as praying thrice daily or wearing phylacteries or tefillin. These are commandments that men are obliged to fulfill. Similarly, in Islam, women often do not lead prayers or processions, indicating a reduced role in religious rites and rituals. The underlying assumption, which suggests that women are not capable or equipped to handle such roles, amplifies the concept of their inferiority. But how does this tie into the feminist viewpoint we've been discussing? The answer is quite simple. Both religionism and feminism, in their individual ways, strip women of their agency and autonomy. While one masks it under the guise of protection, vulnerability, and preservation, the other shrouds it under the concept of victimhood, vulnerability, and empowerment. Ultimately, these ideologies, despite their apparent differences, fundamentally view women as entities incapable of shouldering the full brunt of their actions. Whether it's the feminist perspective of women as perpetual victims or the religious portrayal of women as lesser beings, the message remains consistent. Women, according to these viewpoints, are not regarded as fully autonomous individuals with the ability to make decisions and face the repercussions of their actions. Consequently, the distinction between extreme feminism and religionism begins to fade, revealing a shared viewpoint that positions women in a place of lessened responsibility. Thus, religionism, similar to feminism, also assigns women a position of diminished responsibility. While they may seem at odds, feminism and religionism share a common view of women. A view that takes away agency and autonomy, reducing them to mere objects, stripped of subjectivity. This shared perspective manifests in seemingly paradoxical ways, with one ideology often advocating for veiling and the other for sexualization. In the world of radical feminism, women are often portrayed as objects of victimhood. A narrative is spun where women are presented as beings without autonomy or authority, only existing in relation to the men who supposedly oppress them. They become helpless objects, whose identities and experiences are defined by their victimhood. On the other hand, religionism often objectifies women through a lens of perceived inferiority. Women are seen as lesser beings, less capable of responsibility and autonomy. This perspective reduces women to objects that exist merely for the service and pleasure of their superior male counterparts. Now let's consider the paradoxical manifestations. Feminism, in its self-proclaimed quest to empower women, ironically ends up objectifying them. It promotes the sexualization of women, arguing that it's a form of liberation. However, this can often result in women being viewed more as sexual objects, rather than autonomous individuals. Religionism, conversely, advocates for the veiling of women, supposedly to protect their modesty. But this too is a form of objectification. The veil becomes a symbol of women's inferior status, reinforcing the idea that they are objects to be controlled and protected. Both ideologies, despite their differences, perpetuate the objectification of women.